Welcome to the Sonoran Desert. We're here today at the Picture Rocks Retreat Center, just outside of Tucson, Arizona, a kind of unique desert-looking area. I think if you're used to desert and thinking about desert, this is not a desert of sand dunes. As you can see, this is very lush, lots of plant life, lots of different kinds of forms. And I'm going to be talking to you today about some of the life you see here, but in general about life itself. This series of lectures is about biology. Our aim here today is to talk to you about some issues in biology. My name is Marty Hewlett. I'm a faculty member at the University of Arizona, a professor in the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology there. This series of lectures is going to start today with a philosophical reflection, a historical perspective on the field of biology. We're going to move from that on to talk a little bit about genetics, a little bit about the field of molecular biology, about the area of biotechnology, and ultimately about the Human Genome Project. My credentials for talking to you about that is that I'm a molecular biologist, I'm a virologist, I teach undergraduate courses in introductory biology, in molecular biology, and in virology at the university. But we're not just going to talk about the biology of the situation. I also want to deal specifically with issues in biology, especially issues as they affect our faith. My credentials for that, in fact, are a life of reflection about this, I think you could say, but also in particular involvement with the St. Albert the Great Forum on philosophy, theology, and science, which operates out of the Newman Center at the University of Arizona, and my own personal journey in terms of faith, philosophy, and theology with respect to my science. The topics we'll cover during this series of lectures will not be the details of the science as much as they will be the issues that the science raises for us. So I hope you'll join me on this journey and watch with me as we look at what biology has become in the modern area, what I'm going to call for you modern biology. Now, biology itself means the study of life. Now, what do we mean by life? If we look around us, we see these cacti that are here in the background. We know these as living things. Well, how do we distinguish that from the rocks we see around us? How is it that we know that a cactus or a tree or a bird that flies by is alive and that the rocks we see are not alive? What are the criteria we use to try to establish what is living from what is non-living? Well, one of the obvious criteria is growth. Living things we see around us grow and develop. They go from small, immature forms to larger, mature forms. So growth is one criteria that we use for life. Another criteria is metabolism. The fact that living things that we see take in nutrients and change those nutrients in order to gain energy to do the growth and to do the other kinds of things that they do. For instance, movement in terms of animals. So we have growth and we have metabolism. The third kind of thing we think that living things do is to adapt to their surroundings. So we see many examples of adaptation here to this very dry climate where rainfall is at a minimum. These plants around us have adapted to that kind of environment. They've changed their way of growing, their way of metabolizing to adapt to what they have available. Finally, we think of life as something which is a property which is passed on to succeeding generations. We call this inheritance. So we see the forms around us, and if we find a seed on one of these plants, for instance, these pods here on this cactus which contain the seeds, if we take one of those seeds and we actually planted it in the ground, we have every expectation that what would grow would be another cactus plant, much like the one we see before us. So we call that inheritance, the idea that succeeding generations come from the previous generation. Those are four properties that we associate with life: growth, metabolism, adaptation, and inheritance. And we're going to talk mainly about those latter properties, the properties of adaptation and inheritance, in terms of how modern biology has come to view those properties of life and what we understand about them and what issues the experiments that have been done raise for us in terms of these properties that we call living systems. We've always wondered about living things. I think man has done that for all of his history. If we think about the ancient cave paintings that have been found in places like France, we see that the first thing that ancient man drew were the living creatures around him. We see pictures of the animals that were being hunted. If we look back in our written history in the Western civilization culture, we find that one of the first kinds of approaches to understanding the living world was done actually by Aristotle. Aristotle wrote a treatise on animals in which he described the various ways that animals are formed, the way they grow, the way they move, how they interact with their environment, how they gather food. This treatise, called De Animalis, was of course the only written codification of biology that we had until much, much later in Western history. A little bit later, in the Middle Ages, we have St. Albert the Great, the phenomenal Dominican scholar who was both a philosopher, a theologian, and the preeminent biologist of his day. St. Albert, who is the patron saint of scientists, actually, wrote two large works, one called De Animalibus and the other De Vegetabilibus, both of which were treatises on the biological world. St. Albert was known for his ability to observe biological creatures and to write in great detail about what he saw. So this, in fact, came down to us as really the great codification of the Middle Ages of the biological world. And this is what we had for biology, a description of the living world that we used in order to think about how things are structured and what is made around us, what we see interacting with us. Now, this is the situation in science at the time of the Middle Ages. And in fact, St. Albert's great student, St. Thomas Aquinas, the author of Summa Theologica, is the one who set into place for us the construction, we'll say, of the universe of the Middle Ages. St. Thomas, in his learning from St. Albert, discovered the work of Aristotle, was able to make the work of Aristotle consonant with the Christian thought, was able to formulate an idea about the universe, the heavens, all of nature that was consonant with Scripture, and put together something that fit in terms of the Ptolemaic structure of the universe. And this was a great advance, especially for Western man. However, the problem began when Copernicus decided that the Ptolemaic system of viewing the universe was not exactly wrong as far as he was concerned, but was, shall we say, unbeautiful. Copernicus was concerned about the multiplicity of cycles that had to be envisioned to explain the movement of all the heavenly bodies in the Ptolemaic system, which had the Earth at the center and everything else revolving around it. As a result, Copernicus said, what if we place the sun at the center and we have everything revolve around the sun, the heliocentric model? He said it looked more beautiful this way. What I don't think he foresaw was the great revolution in thought that would come about because of this paradigm shift. That is, that our concept of the heavens, our concept of the entire universe and the world to which it relates would forever be shattered physically. Because no longer was heaven simply straight up above with us at the center. Now with the sun at the center and us revolving around it, suddenly we don't know which way heaven is. We don't know which way things are for the angels and the other spheres that were inherent in Aristotle and in Ptolemaic view and in Thomistic thought. Galileo comes along shortly after that and begins to make observations with his telescope that actually prove the Copernican system, prove in fact that these planets are revolving around the sun that we are riding on. This begins the break between, we'll say, science and theology. The church's reaction to that was only natural for the time. It was a defensive reaction. It's only been recently that the church has gone back to relook at that information and to say, you know, this was an overreaction to the situation, perhaps.